Welcome back. I just finished a 70-mile-an-hour highway range test with this 2025 Porsche Taycan 4 Cross Turismo, and it went 302 miles at a constant 70 miles an hour, way more than its 277-mile EPA range rating. But now that I've got the battery completely drained down to zero, why not do a 0 to 100% charge recording, which is exactly what we're going to do. Now, you'll notice I'm at an EVgo charger, and the EVgo charger split power. This station here is completely full right now. There's actually people waiting to charge. But the reason why I'm parked here is because this side of the charger doesn't work. So I don't have to try to get a charger that nobody else is using, which wouldn't be possible today. I'd have to come back late tonight. But I know this side of this charger doesn't work. So I'm just waiting for the Fisker Ocean to finish up charging, and then I'm gonna slide over, plug in there, and nobody can come in here and plug in and share power, which is what the stations do. And to do a proper charge recording, you can't have the charger giving half the power to somebody else. So as soon as the Fisker Ocean leaves, I'm gonna plug this guy in and do a full 0 to 100 charging session. We'll do our full analyzing with all our charts and graphs. I think he's about to unplug, so let's get into it. Before I jump into the charge recordings, I want to talk a little bit about Taycan charging. Ever since the Taycan came out, it's been one of, if not the best, DC fast charging electric vehicles that you could buy here in the US and in Europe. China is a different discussion, but we don't have those vehicles here right now, so I can't really compare them. But for the vehicles I've been able to drive, Taycan is really top of the food chain, that and Lucid vehicles. But the Taycan has always, since it launched, been one of my favorite vehicles to drive and charge. And that's not surprising. Porsche is a performance brand. And with electric vehicles, performance isn't just about the wheels on the pavement. It's also about how well the vehicle can charge. So, kudos to Porsche for understanding that and right from the get-go, making the Taycan charge exceptionally well. And the good news for 2025 is it charges even better now. Porsche also increased the battery size, whereas the old Performance Plus battery used to have 93 kilowatt hour total capacity and 83 kilowatt hour usable. And for 2025, the Performance Plus battery went from the 93 kilowatt hour total capacity I just mentioned up to 105 kilowatt hour. And the usable capacity is now 97 kilowatt hour. And the vehicle that I had here, the Taycan 4 Cross Turismo, has the Performance Plus battery, which is the bigger battery. The smaller battery pack now, the performance battery, has 89 kilowatt hour and 83 kilowatt hour usable, but I'm not doing charge recordings of that vehicle just yet. Maybe I will in the future. For now, we're concentrating on the larger Performance Plus battery. And I also did a 10 to 80% charge recording, which we're going to get into a little bit later in the video. And the reason why I did that was Porsche had always claimed that with the previous generation batteries, it could charge from 10% to 80% in about 21.5 minutes. And I've confirmed that with my independent tests. But with the new battery, which is larger, it can now charge from 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. Well, that's Porsche's claim at least. So not only do you have a bigger battery, but it actually charges faster, and it can accept a higher charge rate, well over 300 kilowatts, where the old battery was limited to 270 kilowatts, which was still industry leading at the time when it launched. It could take more power in than any other electric vehicle. Okay, so I did a 0 to 100% charge recording, and then I'm going to show you a 10 to 80% charge recording, and we'll do all the usual charts and graphs and analyze the hell out of this thing and see just how well it charges. But one last thing I want to mention about Taycan charging. All battery packs are temperature sensitive. The battery needs to be at the right temperature in order to accept the full amount of power, and that's why the EVs charge slower in the winter if the batteries aren't preconditioned. Most electric vehicles allow you to precondition the battery if you know you're going to be fast charging to warm it up so when you get there it can accept the maximum power. Not all, but most. Some allow you to do it manually. Some you have to enter the DC fast charger in the navigation system and then the vehicle knows, okay, we're going to a DC fast charger, so let me warm the battery up and get it ready. And sometimes it could take upwards of an hour if it's very cold out to get that battery to the right temperature. And the previous generation Taycan was very temperature sensitive. You really had to get that thing, I think it was up around 90 degrees Fahrenheit in order for it to accept the full power right from the beginning of the charging session. But now with this new generation battery, which is larger, it also has a much wider range of temperature to accept full power. So it's easier to get it to accept the full power. Now, for charge recordings, I always make sure I precondition the battery. I'll even leave it in the heated state of charge garage overnight the day before so the battery isn't cold if it's in the winter. And then I'll also hit battery preconditioning and drive it for like a half an hour or 40 minutes before I plug in, which I've done with this car for these two tests. So I'm pretty certain that we were at the right temperature and the results should be pretty much optimal for Taycan charging. So first, let's take a look at the 0 to 100% recording, and then we'll jump over to the 10 to 80% recording. State of Charge is powered by Qmerit, North America's premier installer of electric vehicle charging equipment. After I've helped you decide which charger to buy, follow the link in the description of my videos and have Qmerit install it. And if you do follow that link, Qmerit will waive the $150 installation deposit. But this is an exclusive offer for State of Charge followers. So in order to get that offer, you must follow the link in the description of my videos. In less than 1 minute, the Taycan is ripping along at over 300 kilowatt. And it's going to charge at 300 kilowatt or better for about 13 minutes, all the way up to 60% state of charge. It reached 10% state of charge in a little over 2 minutes, 20% in a mere 4 minutes, 30% state of charge comes in 6 minutes, 40% in only 8 minutes. And are you seeing a pattern here? It's taking only 2 minutes to add every 10% of the battery as we're ripping along at over 300 kilowatt. And that means it's adding about 30 miles of range in every 2 minutes. 50% then arrives in 10 minutes. Think about it. This car went 302 miles in my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test. So it just added 150 miles of highway driving range in 10 minutes. That's really incredible. 60% state of charge comes at 12 minutes and 28 seconds. And at this point, the Taycan will start to throttle down its charging rate, but we've already added 180 miles in 12 minutes. That's really wild. 70% state of charge comes 3 minutes later, and the Taycan has now been charging for 15 minutes. The Taycan is now charging at 211 kilowatt, but at 70% state of charge, I think most EV owners would take that in a heartbeat. The Taycan reaches 80% state of charge in 19 minutes. Now think about that again. The Taycan's usable battery pack is 97 kilowatt hour, and we charged from 0 to 80% of it in under 20 minutes. That's nearly 250 miles added in 19 minutes. That's next level. It then takes 8 more minutes to reach 90% state of charge, and does so after 27 minutes of charging. It then takes 26 more minutes to go from 90% to 100%. So it takes just about the same amount of time to charge a Taycan from 0 to 90% as it does to charge it from 90% to 100%. So if that doesn't tell you to unplug at 80 or 85% when you're at a public fast charger, nothing will. All right, so 0 to 80% in 19 minutes. Man, if you're not impressed by that, I don't know what's going to impress you. And it holds over 300 kilowatt all the way up to 60% state of charge, and then holds over 200 kilowatt for a while. So I mean, the charging curve on the Taycan is just like plug in, boom, really to the point where you're going to unplug because, as we talk about a lot here at State of Charge, there's really no reason to hang out a DC fast charger once you're above 80% or so, unless you really need every mile of range to get to your next destination. Okay, so Porsche talks about 10 to 80%, says that the Taycan will do it in 18 minutes now, the new Taycan. If you cut 10% to 80% out of this charging session, it actually did it in 16 and a half minutes. Minute and a half faster than what Porsche promises. But that's really not the way to properly test a 10 to 80% charging session. You need to do a 10 to 80% charging session. You can't just pull it out of a bigger charging session. It could have different charging characteristics. So I did go to a DC fast charger again. Actually, I think it was the same one a couple days later, and recorded a 10 to 80% charging session. So now let's take a look at that before we jump into all the charts and graphs. So within a minute, the charging rate shoots up over 290 kilowatt, but unlike the 0 to 100% charging session, it doesn't eclipse 300 kilowatt till after about 3 minutes of charging. But that doesn't seem to hurt the session at all, because just like the 0 to 100% charging session, we're adding 10% of the battery every 2 minutes like clockwork. 60% state of charge arrives in only 10 minutes. So that's 50% of the battery added in 10 minutes. Exactly the same amount of time it took us to go from 0 to 50% in the 0 to 100% charging session. So basically the results are identical here. 70% state of charge comes in 12 and a half minutes. And we finish the 10% to 80% charging session in 16 minutes and 17 seconds. Now that's nearly 2 minutes faster than what Porsche promises the Taycan can charge at from 10 to 80%. All right, so a little over 16 minutes from 10% to 80%, validating my first charging session. So now I did it twice. Both times it was somewhere a little bit longer than 16 minutes, beating Porsche's promise of 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. Again, under-promising, over-delivering. That's Porsche's way they do things. Even when they publish quarter mile times and 0 to 60 times, the vehicle can actually beat what they published. That's the way Porsche does things, which is really great. Okay, so now let's take a look at those two charging sessions on my graphs and charts, and we'll talk about range replenishing rate, how long it takes to add driving miles, in addition to showing you the charging curve and then the charging curve over time. So let's check those out now. Okay, so first up, we're going to take a look at the 0 to 100% charging session. And the first graph we're going to look at is the charging power graph, which is the charging curve. You can see right here in the beginning, it took less than a minute and bang, we're up to 300 kilowatt, and it just holds it all the way up to 60% state of charge. You can see here, we get a gradual increase in charging rate, and that's because while the Taycan was accepting the same amount of current, the pack voltage was gradually increasing, so the rate of charge goes up a little bit. And it holds over 300 kilowatt to 60%. That's amazing. And then we get this drop down here to about 210, 215 kilowatt, in which it holds it to about 74% state of charge. At that point, we do a pretty dramatic drop down to 80% when we're pulling 100 kilowatt. And then you get the final walk down to 100% state of charge, where the decrease in charging power is relatively linear here. And now let's take a look at the charging curve compressed, because I've added charging time in minutes on the bottom. Don't pay attention to the red line. That's the time to charge line. Right now we're looking at the blue line here, which is the charging curve, but with time added. You can see it's the same charging curve, but now it's compressed because we've added time on the x-axis. You could see that in the beginning of the charging session, we get all these juicy kilowatt hour here, over 300 kilowatt, up to somewhere around the 14-minute mark, 13, 14 minutes. But what I really want you to notice is that the first 19 minutes here, That chunky area there, that's 0 to 80% in 19 minutes. And we added 240 miles if you go by my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test, which I did recently and ended up with 302 miles driven at 70 miles an hour. So basically, in under 20 minutes, you could add well more than 200 miles of real-world highway driving in the new Taycan 4 Cross Turismo, even more in the Taycan sedan. So it took 19 minutes to add 80%. It's going to take around 35 minutes for the rest of the charging session. So you really want to unplug it 80%. I mean, you can push it up to maybe 90% if you really need the extra miles. But if you're on a road trip with a Taycan and you can find a 350 kilowatt DC fast charger, there's no reason to stay there longer than 20 minutes because you're not going to plug in at 0%. So once 20 minutes is up, you're going to be pushing 90% of the battery. And at that time, unplug and move on. You'll get to your destination faster. Okay, and now I'll remove the blue charging curve. And all we have left here is the time to charge chart. You could see I have these 15 mile per minute, 10 mile per minute, and 5 mile per minute guidelines. So you can see how many miles the Taycan is adding for every minute of charging. This is fantastic. When you get over 10 miles per minute with an EV, you're charging really quickly. And you can see here, for the first 25 minutes, it's charging faster than that. So that's an excellent job by Porsche here. Okay, so just how fast did it charge? For the first 10 minutes, we added 13.3 miles of range for every minute if you're going to use the EPA range rating, and 14.5 miles added for every minute if you use the results of my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test. The second 10 minutes of charging, from 10 minutes to 20 minutes, 9 miles a minute EPA, 9.8 with my range test. From 20 minutes to 30 minutes of charging, 2.8 EPA and 3.1 for my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test. Wow, Tom, it really slowed up. The Taycan's not charging great. No, that's not the case. The reason is it charges so well in the first 20 minutes. By then, the vehicle is at such a high state of charge, it has to slow down charging. So while that's very slow charging, it's because you've already achieved your goal. And look at the 30-minute to 40-minute and the 40-minute to 50-minute. You're barely adding 1 mile per minute average for the last 25 minutes of charging. So while watching it in time lapse is one thing, when you put it on paper and you could see just how much faster vehicles charge when they're at a lower state of charge, really puts it into perspective. And this just reinforces you don't want to stay at a DC fast charger more than 20 minutes. If you have a working 350 kilowatt DC fast charger, that is. Next up, we'll use the same chart to see how long it takes to add driving miles. Okay, 50 miles EPA comes in at 3.9 minutes of charging, and for my highway range test, 3.6. You get 100 miles of driving range EPA in 7.6 minutes. My range test, 6.9 minutes. 150 in 11.3 and 10.3. 200 miles of EPA rated range gets added in 16 minutes. That's awesome. And 14.1 minutes if you want to go by my range test. 250 miles in 28.3 minutes EPA and 21.1 minutes on my 70-mile-an-hour range test. 300 miles never comes with EPA range because it's only EPA range rated at 277 miles. However, I went 302 miles in my range test, so it took 52.7 minutes, but it was pretty much the entire charging session here from 0 to 100%, but it did add 300 miles of range. And finally, my master charging chart. In this chart, each block represents 10% of the battery in this charging session. So you can pick any starting point you want, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, whatever, and finish on any ending point, 60%, 70%, 80%, whatever you want. And you can see all the data in that one box for that section of the charging session. You get to see how long it took to charge that part of the charging session, how much state of charge was added, how much range was added, and this is EPA, and also the average charging power during that section of the charging session, and how much energy was added in kilowatt hour. So if you wanted to say, look at how long does it take to go from 20% to 70%, you would take a look at this box, or from 40% to 90%, you'd look at this box. And the boxes are also color coded. The light green boxes indicate that in that section, the vehicle was charging at least 80% of its maximum charging rate that we got in this charging session. The darker green color, 60% to 80%. The beige color, 40% to 60%. The orange color, 20% to 40%. And in the red boxes, it was charging at less than 20% of its maximum charging rate. And now let's take a look at the charge for the 10 to 80% charging session. Again, we plug in relatively soon. We're up over 300 kilowatts and it holds it all the way up to 60% state of charge before it starts ramping its power down. And just like the 0 to 100% charge recording, it hits a little bit of a ledge and holds 210, 215 kilowatt for a little while, although not as long as it did with the 0 to 100% charging session. And then it begins a pretty steep drop down to 80%, which is basically the same as the curve on the 0 to 100% session. And now let's jump over to the time to charge chart with charging time in minutes on the x-axis and state of charge on the y-axis. I have those same guidelines, 15 miles a minute, 10 miles a minute, and 5 miles a minute here. And this session was only 16 minutes, so we don't have a lot to look at, but it was very similar to what we saw with the 0 to 100. And you can see here in the first 10 minutes of charging, we never made it to 20 minutes because we went from 10% to 80% in 16 minutes. We averaged 13.6 miles of range added per minute, according to EPA, and 14.9 miles per minute added if you want to use my 70-mile highway range test as the metric. And now let's jump over to how long it took to add driving range. To add 50 miles of driving range took 3.4 minutes, according to the EPA, 3.1 minutes with my range test. 100 miles came in 7 minutes and 6.4 minutes. 150 miles, 10.9 minutes and 9.9 minutes. And 200 miles didn't come with the EPA range rating because from 10 to 80%, it's only 70% of the battery. And with a 277 mile EPA range rating, we only added 194 miles. But according to my range test, we did. And we did that in 14.2 minutes. So this chart here, I think is really important because most people are going to plug in at around 10%. They're not going to drive it down to 0 like I do. And this gives you a really good idea of how long you have to wait at a functioning 350 kilowatt DC fast charger to add driving range if you're on a road trip. And finally, let's take a look at the master charging chart for the 10 to 80% charging session. Not going to go through all of the boxes here, but we are going to take a look at one box in particular, and that's the box that shows the entire charging session from 10% to 80%. Shows here that it took 16 minutes. We averaged 271 kilowatt over the entire charging session. 10 to 80% with an average of nearly 300 kilowatt. That's awesome. We added 70% of the battery, which was 68 kilowatt hour, and we added 211 miles according to my 70 mile an hour highway range test. And while I didn't note it here, that would have been 194 miles if you want to use the EPA range rating as the metric. And if you're not already totally bored by all these graphs, I'm going to give you a couple more. And this is a charging curve comparison between those two tests. You can see it's nearly identical. I mean, very rarely do I get charging curve overlays that are so closely matched that you almost can't see that there's two different colors there, but you get that with Porsche. That's what I love. Repeatable. You know what you're going to get every time, unless the battery is really cold or really hot. Every time you do it, you just know what you're going to expect. And Porsche does that right with charging. I mean, look at these curves. They're almost identical. The only difference is up here after 60% when we have the drop. Remember on both charging sessions, at a point, it drops down pretty dramatically to around 210, 212 kilowatt, holds it for a little while, and then it starts the drop down to 80%. And you notice with the 0 to 100% charging session, it happened a little bit earlier. It happened at like 63% state of charge. It gets to this ledge and holds it all the way out to around 73%. Whereas with the 10 to 80% charging session, it doesn't do that till 68%. But then it follows that same drop down, hits a ledge, holds it to the same point, and then starts dropping down to 80%. That's the only difference in these two charging curves. And lastly, let's take a look at the two charging session overlays where we observe the C rate curve. Now, the C rate is the rate that an electric vehicle or any battery discharges or recharges. A 1C rate would mean in 1 hour, you would recharge your vehicle from 0 to 100%. So the Taycan has a 97 kilowatt hour battery. So if it pulled an average of 97 kilowatt for the entire charging session from 0 to 100, it would have a 1C rate. So take a look at what we have here. Up until about 65%-ish, it holds nearly a 3C rate. That's outstanding. It's probably the only electric vehicle that I've tested that averages 3C all the way up to about 65% state of charge, which is really, really something. It then obviously drops off. The higher the state of charge, you can't continue to cram those electrons into the battery pack, so it has to charge at a slower rate. But the Taycan holds a C rate of greater than 2, up past 70% state of charge, almost up to 75% state of charge, and you just don't see that often with electric vehicles. All right, well, there's not much more I need to say about Porsche Taycan charging. It is an absolutely fantastic charging electric vehicle. It's a fantastic driving electric vehicle too. It's probably my favorite driving vehicle. If you're going to give me one EV to drive for a weekend, I would take a Taycan. I'm not sure which Taycan I would take, but I'm pretty sure it would be a Taycan. I love all the variants, so I'd have to think about that. But it always charged extremely well, but the changes they made for the 2025 model year makes it an absolute charging monster. But is it the best charging electric vehicle? Again, outside of China? I would have said yes when I recorded this video only 2.5, 3 weeks ago when I did the charge recording. And I was fully intending on saying that in my video, but the world changes quickly, and those of you that follow this channel may have seen a video that I put out just a couple of days ago about Lucid Gravity charging. The Lucid Gravity is a new vehicle that Lucid is selling. It's a 7-passenger long-range SUV. Customer deliveries are going to begin at the end of this month. And they invited me to go out to California and do some charge recordings. I haven't done a full, complete analyzing yet, but pretty sure it actually beats the Taycan. So what I'm going to do next is in about a week or so, I'm going to put out a video comparing the Taycan to the Lucid Gravity. So you can see which one is the EV charging champ and by how much. I don't think it's going to be by that much, and I think one of the big advantages that the Gravity might have over the Taycan is its range, because you have to consider that when you talk about electric vehicle charging. You can't just talk about, well, which EV pumps the most kilowatt hours into the pack faster. Well, you can if you'd like to, but I like to blend in range, because I think the most important thing is how fast does it add range? Because that's what you care about when you're driving and you're on a road trip or whatever. How long do I have to sit here to get X amount of miles? And the Gravity has an EPA range rating of 450 miles, whereas this Taycan I tested was only 277. Now, there are variants of the Taycan with the same battery that'll charge the same way that has a longer EPA rated range, but it's not going to close that gap. It won't be 450 miles. So we'll have to do some math in the charts and figure out the miles per minute and how long it takes to add 200, 300, 400 miles, all that stuff. And that'll be coming up in the next video. And I almost feel bad for the Taycan because I've been waiting to do charge recordings on this for a while. I didn't want to do it over the dead of winter because I wanted to do range testings and also. So I waited till it warmed up a little bit. And it was almost like as soon as I recorded it, boom, the Gravity came out. Now all of a sudden there's something that's faster. While the Taycan has been the fastest charging EV since they did this refresh many months ago. But it's still, that doesn't take anything away from the Taycan. It's still an incredible vehicle to drive and to charge. But look out for that video in a week or so where we'll do a real deep dive. And these are definitely by far the two fastest charging electric vehicles that you can get today in the US and Europe. Well, you can't get the Gravity in Europe just yet. But I know China's got some wild things going on over there, but we haven't been able to independently test them. And Until I get over there and really drive the cars and test them, I'm just going to talk about what I know I can buy here and charge and drive. And, Taycan and Gravity are definitely 1 and 2 as far as the fastest charging electric vehicles that we can buy here. Listen, that's all I have here today. If this is your first time here at State of Charge, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming electric vehicle news and reviews. And as always, thanks for watching.